6 days after I buried my wife of 31 years, her sister called me and said something that made my hands go cold. "I found something in her belongings you need to see. Come alone. Don't tell the children yet." I drove to her house that same evening, genuinely unsure whether I was about to learn something beautiful about my wife or something that would unravel everything I thought I understood about the last 3 decades of my life. What was waiting for me in that envelope did both at once. My name's Arthur. My wife, Diane, passed away after a 2-year battle with ovarian cancer, a fight she handled with a kind of quiet, steady grace that, honestly, still humbles me every time I think about it. We were married 31 years, raised 2 children together, built an entirely ordinary, entirely good life in the same house we'd bought as newlyweds. Diane's younger sister, Carol, had always been close to her, closer in some ways than Diane and I were to our own siblings. Carol had been at the hospital constantly during those final 2 years, handling logistics I was too exhausted and too heartbroken to manage myself. I trusted Carol completely, which is part of why her phone call 6 days after the funeral unsettled me as much as it did. Carol wasn't someone prone to drama or exaggeration. "Come alone," she'd said, "and don't tell the children yet." Our children, Michael and Rebecca, both in their late 20s, had already gone back to their own lives in other states, still processing their own grief in their own ways. Carol's specific instruction to keep them out of it, at least initially, told me this was something she genuinely believed needed careful handling before anyone else weighed in. Carol had been helping me sort through some of Diane's personal belongings, jewelry, old photo albums, the kinds of things families naturally divide up after a loss. In a locked drawer inside Diane's childhood keepsake box, which had been stored in Carol's attic for years before Diane asked for it back during her illness, Carol found a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in Diane's unmistakable handwriting. Beneath that envelope, folded separately, was something else. A birth certificate, dated almost 34 years earlier, several months before Diane and I had even met. I sat at Carol's kitchen table, holding both items for a long moment before opening either one. The birth certificate listed a baby girl's name I didn't recognize, born to a mother whose name I also didn't recognize immediately, though something about it tugged faintly at memory. The father's line on that certificate was left blank. Carol, watching my face carefully, finally said the thing she'd clearly been holding back the entire drive over in my mind. "Arthur, I think Diane had a daughter before she met you, one she never told either of us about." I opened the envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter, several pages, written in Diane's handwriting, but clearly composed sometime during her illness, given the slightly unsteady quality of the later pages compared to earlier ones. Diane explained that at 19 years old, several years before we met, she'd become pregnant during a brief relationship that ended before she even told the father. Facing enormous pressure from her own parents at the time, pressure Carol, only 15 then, had never fully understood the reasons behind. Diane made the decision to place the baby for a closed adoption, a decision she wrote about with a rawness that made it clear she'd carried real grief over it for the rest of her life. Quietly, privately, in a way none of us had ever detected. She explained that she'd made contact with an adoption registry 8 years into our marriage, learning that her daughter had been placed with a loving family and was, by all available information, doing well. Information Diane decided, at the time, not to disrupt with a reunion attempt, believing it would cause more harm than comfort to a life that had already found its own stable shape. The letter continued. 2 years before her diagnosis, Diane had reconnected briefly, cautiously, through a mutual adoption support contact, learning her daughter's adult name and general location, though the two of them had never actually met face to face. Diane had wanted to, desperately, but illness overtook the timeline before she found the courage to reach out directly. "I should have told you decades ago, Arthur," she wrote. "I was terrified it would change how you saw me, or worse, that it would somehow diminish what we built together. I understand now, far too late, that keeping it from you all these years was its own kind of unfairness, to you and to her." The final page contained a name, a city, and a simple, aching request. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Please, if you're willing, reach out to her. Not for me. For yourself and for Michael and Rebecca, who deserve to know they have a sister, if that's something everyone can find room for." I didn't say much to Carol after finishing the letter. I sat there for what felt like a very long time, running through 31 years of marriage, searching for moments that suddenly made more sense. A distant look Diane sometimes got around certain birthdays, an unusual sensitivity to adoption storylines in movies we'd watched together, a specific, unexplained sadness every year around late September that I'd simply attributed, over the decades, to something I never thought to ask directly about. Carol admitted she'd had no idea either, that their parents had apparently taken enormous care to keep the pregnancy hidden, even from a 15-year-old sister living in the same house, sending Diane to stay with a distant relative for several months during that time, under a cover story about helping care for an ailing aunt. I asked Carol why she'd insisted I come alone, without Michael and Rebecca. She said, simply, that she felt this needed to land with me first, privately, before deciding together how, or whether, to bring it to our children, given how enormous and complicated a revelation like this could be for them, especially so soon after losing their mother. I spent the following week thinking, more than acting. Eventually, I decided Diane's final written wish deserved genuine effort, not just quiet acknowledgement. I hired a licensed adoption search professional, explaining the situation carefully, and within 10 days, she confirmed the identity of Diane's daughter, a woman named Jennifer, 34 years old, living roughly 6 hours away, working as an elementary school teacher, married with one young son of her own. I wrote Jennifer a letter myself, rather than calling, wanting to give her the same careful, unhurried space to process everything that I'd needed myself. I explained who I was, enclosed a copy of Diane's own letter with identifying details of the adoptive family redacted for her privacy, and made clear there was no expectation attached, only an open door, if she ever wanted to walk through it. Jennifer called 2 weeks later, her voice shaking through most of the conversation. She explained that she'd always known she was adopted, that her adoptive parents had been loving and supportive, and that she'd occasionally wondered about her birth mother, but had never pursued a search herself, partly out of respect for the only parents she'd ever known, who were, thankfully, still alive and fully supportive of her exploring this now that the door had opened from the other side. Carol and I decided together it was time to bring Michael and Rebecca into the full picture. I flew out to see them in person, rather than explaining something this significant over the phone. Their reactions were, understandably, complicated. Shock first, then a flood of questions about their mother's history. Then, slowly, over the following weeks, something that surprised all of us. Genuine curiosity about Jennifer, rather than resentment or displacement. Rebecca, in particular, latched onto the idea of an older sister with an eagerness that, frankly, moved me. We arranged a first meeting 3 months later, at a neutral location. Everyone nervous, everyone careful. It wasn't an instant, movie-perfect reunion. There was awkwardness, long pauses, the natural strangeness of adults meeting siblings they'd had no idea existed. But there was also, unmistakably, the beginning of something real. It's been just over a year now since that phone call from Carol. Jennifer has become a genuine, if still evolving, part of our extended family. Holidays are a little fuller now, a little more complicated to schedule, and honestly, a little more meaningful for it. I think about Diane's letter often, especially the line about not wanting to change how I saw her. The truth is, learning about Jennifer didn't diminish 31 years of marriage in my eyes. It just added one more dimension to a woman I already knew was capable of carrying enormous private weight with a grace I never fully appreciated until I understood exactly how much weight she'd actually been carrying. Carol's phone call 6 days after the funeral wasn't the ending of anything. It turned out to be the beginning of a family neither of us knew we were missing. If this story got to you, the next one is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.